right, Chuck. So we'll get into your KFIZ career in a bit, but when did you know in life that you wanted to get into broadcasting?
Well, I was 13 years old, and me and my dad were at a Bucks playoff game and went down to Media Row, which was in the first row at the old Milwaukee Arena. And we went down there. I said, Dad, what's that? And he said, those are all the guys who are, in the media covering the game. And let's, these guys get college educations, and they cover the game. So, I went up to my seat. We watched the game, and all I could think about was, wow, I'd love to have those free seats every night, and the free food, I guess, that came, I learned later, that came around with it. So I wasn't going to wait till after college. I started calling radio stations on Monday morning because this game was Friday night. And I told my dad I found a station in Waukesha that needs someone to cover games for $10 a game. This was 1981. Dad drove me out for the interview, got the job, and 14 years old, I started covering games. And, as I always say, it beats working for a living, SK.
It sure does. It sure does. So what about, where were you at career-wise right before you'd come to KFIZ?
Oh, I was working sports radio in Milwaukee, which is the old WAUK, 1510. We were the first ones to do sports radio. Did an afternoon show, but it's the early days of sports talk where there's no cell phones, there's no emails, there's no texting and all that. So you're relying from 1 to 5 in the afternoon from people calling from their home or their work or whatever on hard phone lines. And that was tough, especially when you're first starting out. You don't have any listeners. But eventually we set the ground level on that, and look where sports radio is today in Wisconsin. Although one of my former stations just went dark yesterday. So but I started there, and I heard about that there was an opening at KFIZ in Fond du Lac, and I loved high school sports. And I found this from Wade Bates at a Bucks game that there was an opening, ironically at a Bucks game. And he said that Greg Stensland and Tom Biola were leaving, going across town. So Monday, I shipped my tape of my work and my resume up to Randy Hopper, who was a GM and still is president, and heard back from him. And one thing led to another, and spent 10 great years at KFIZ.
And so talk a little bit about covering the high school sports and just some of your favorite memories from calling games.
Well, I loved it. I worked a split shift, which I'll never do again in my life, where I did the early morning sportscast on with Jerry St. John and his morning show. I was there from 5:30 till 8:30, and then I'd come back and do a talk show in the later on, a sports talk show, which later turned out to be a sports talk show on a sports station that we owned. So I did that. I did a split shift, but as far as locally and covering the games, and I would go out and interview the coaches, and did play-by-play. And my main play-by-play roles were the Fond du Lac football and basketball teams, and they had great runs, especially the basketball team. As they had terrific runs. Went to state 4 times in my 10 years, and numerous other runs where they got to the sectional at Oshkosh, and I had a great time doing those games. And we lived and breathed Fond du Lac sports for a 10-year run. To me, the Packers and the Brewers and the Bucks were all secondary, SK. I love the Fond du Lac sports, and I love that. I still run into people today from Fond du Lac who, appreciated, the games that we did and all that. And that was a great run that we had. And a lot of nights at gymnasiums in Oshkosh and Appleton, and the old Greenwich High School, and Fond du Lac, and of course legendary Fruit Field. But a terrific 10 years of my life. Had a fun time, and 10 years at one radio station is a long time in this business. And eventually had to go, and ended up going to Green Bay, and it kind of, my career kind of trended very high up to where I am now today. But I have KFIZ to thank for that too.
You also had the privilege, I think it was 2000, the Fondy boys won the state baseball championship. What do you
Yes.
remember about that run?
Yeah, that was the at the Fox City Stadium or whatever it's called today, where the Timber Rattlers play. Yeah, did the play-by-play, and the kid Fisher pitched the no-hitter in the championship game. He was the number 3 starter. It was fantastic. Marty Paulson, who just left, just retired, won a state championship, and I remember staying up all night, partying, going to Marty's house, and we were all over there, and it was a great time. Fond du Lac won a state championship, and in baseball, and it was a great kickoff to summer. And a lot of those kids who played in the baseball team, several of them I knew them from other sports, and it was great to see those kids come through and have that happen to them. But yeah, that was a great time. See a kid pitch a no-hitter in the championship game that's never been done before. Maybe the greatest sports moment in Fond du Lac history. Although you think of football, and I'm sure there's football stories out there too. In the 1987 football game against upset of when I wasn't here against Manitowoc was certainly one of them, and there were 6,000 people at Fruit Field that day. But kid throws a no-hitter in the championship game of the state game when he had not started many games, if any, that entire year. To me, that's a heck of a story. Like somebody going out and putting up 25 points off the bench in the state title basketball game, and he hasn't scored much during the regular season. Same thing. So yeah, that's one of the all-time best Fond du Lac sports stories, and I got to be a part of it.
What are some of your memories from doing the talk show Sportsline? I think it was initially 3 to 4, and then eventually moved to 5 to 6 in the afternoon. What do you remember about Sportsline?
Well, the caller base was less because we're talking going from Milwaukee to Fond du Lac, and I think my gimmick was I came in and kind of was the heel, and if I had I played the heel once in a while, and none of that in the morning show. And if I could have done that over again, I would have. Yeah, I don't think that was the right place for it, but I did, and I got listeners, and I had fans, and enjoyed doing it. And if I had to do it over again, I did Brewers and Bucks and Packers and some high school sports. But if I had to do it all over again, I would have had a 1-hour show, strictly local sports. I would have just not even touched on the Packers, Brewers, and Bucks. Would have done just 1 hour strictly of local, because KFIZ, that's what it's built on, the local tradition of 100 years of news and sports. And I did other sports, but I should have stuck to local sports. And that's the route I should have gone. But I had fun. Again, I'd come in there, I'd do the early morning sportscast, go home, take a nap, and then come back in the afternoon, stop off at Subway or Taco Bell, and then get to the radio station and have at it for an hour or two and doing the show, and then maybe cover a game at night. So sometimes I'd be working 3 different shifts. But maybe what I'm the broadcaster I am today.
A small station, in a small community like KFIZ, when disasters strike, it's all hands on deck. And when the tornado hit Oakfield, I think you were fairly new, right?
Mm-hmm. First week.
Even though you were a sports guy, you had to, you became a news guy in that moment. What do you remember about the Oakfield tornado and being part of that coverage?
Well, yeah, the first week the tornado hit, it was a Thursday night, 1996. And I always heard Fond du Lac in Dodge County, living in Milwaukee, we get some bad weather, but I'd always heard, when you're watching the news down there, Fond du Lac in Dodge County always seemed to be on the severe weather reports. Fond du Lac in Dodge County. And sure enough, my 4th day there, that happened. And I'm like, well, what am I getting myself into here? And I drove Jeff McAndrew. We went out to Oakfield that night, and he did the coverage. I just went out there with him as something to drive. I didn't really do any news stories or anything like that, but that's where a radio station like KFIZ excels local coverage, and we had to have stuff like that. And Jeff went out there and covered it, did a great job. And it was just sad to see this whole community, which I had never been to before, like that, and just a disaster. It was just a good sports community, good people out there, and just to see that whole community just turned over upside down wasn't very. It was not good. But they've rebuilt. They've come back strong. The town looks great, and God bless those people out there. And it could have been mass loss of lives with that tornado ripping through there, and one of the biggest tornadoes in our state history. But they survived it, and they moved on, and they rebuilt and built back, and they were very strong out there. And God bless the people of Oakfield, because that was 26 years ago. Wow, that's a lifetime. And it was a disaster, but that was probably the biggest news disaster of my years at KFIZ. But then there was that's a story that our radio station's got to cover well, and they did a great job.
What are your memories from being on the Breakfast Club and bantering with Jerry St. John and Jeff McAndrew? I
thought Jeff McAndrew had some tough shoes to fill, coming in for Greg Stensland, who's still doing news. So, Stensland's got all these news scoops and connections around, and Jeff's coming from, I believe, Rice Lake. And, Jeff did a fine job. I thought, Jerry St. John is a prototypical morning show guy. There's not a person who will turn on Jerry St. John and say, God, I don't like that guy. He's got a great voice, welcoming, pleasure to meet, knows the community backwards, frontwards, and upside down. And, he didn't know, I didn't need him to know a lot about sports. He wasn't a big sports guy, but he tried, and he didn't really have to. I just enjoyed talking to him on the air, and he was good at his job and a professional. And I thought, too, a guy who probably could have gone on and done bigger things. But he loved it here, and he's still going strong. He sounds great. And again, to me, I think he is the voice of the Fond du Lac community, the good morning voice of the Fond du Lac community. That's Jerry St. John. Jerry didn't need me to put him over, but I just did.
I'm sure he appreciates it. Final thoughts on your 10 years at KFIZ and 100 years as a whole for the station?
Well, KFIZ is one of the great radio stations in our country. 100 years, legendary. You talk to anybody around the state, and I've been everywhere. Everybody knows KFIZ, those call letters. It's, we're talking a century of broadcasting. When you talk about, the professional sports teams, KFIZ, they wouldn't know the call letters of some station up north, but people know KFIZ, and it's been strong. Legends, Joe Gazer, Stensland was on there. He did great stuff. Jerry St. John's a legend. I'm forgetting some names right now, but a lot of awesome local talent who devoted their lives to that radio station right there. And the station is the backbone. I always think the radio station and the newspaper are the backbone of the community. KFIZ certainly is. Can't take away 100 years. You can never take that away from them. They'll just keep going on and on and on. And I love the fact that they're on FM now, an FM signal. Wish it was a little stronger so I can get it here in Lomira on 100.7, but I try to get the Brewer games on and listen to it, and hopefully that's going to be better as well. But KFIZ is a great voice of our area, and they've done well for 100 years and keep going strong. And my 10 years there, I loved it. Meeting people, working with people like you, Wade, Bob Hoffmaster, Hopper, everybody. The people I worked with closely and saw every day. Steve Torgerson, who worked on FM, guys like that, just people who had a lot of pride in the community and pride in their work, jobs and work. And that's what made KFIZ great.